to the Liberty Podcast with Clint Armitage. We are proclaiming liberty one show at a time, and the next one starts right now. How's it going, everyone? Clint Armitage with the Liberty Podcast. So I recorded this one on the road. I was in my truck and it was raining, and it rained during the first portion of it and the last portion of it. Otherwise, in the middle is pretty clean and pretty clear. So I just wanted to let you know that before we get started. Let's jump into it. What's up, everybody? Clint Armitage with the Liberty Podcast. Okay, so this episode is actually entitled Elisha, or Elisha, however you want to say it, and the miracles. And this is part one of a two-part series. And I wanted to do Elisha because, one, I actually really like Elisha and his miracles and the stuff that he did. And then I also, since we were talking about Elijah last time and David, we came across the ending there in the Elijah part or section that we were talking about in that episode, and talked about him passing on the mantle to Elisha. So that's why I figured, you know what, let's talk about Elisha and, at least a few of his miracles, at least a couple of his miracles. Let's talk about that. So Elisha was passed the mantle from Elijah, and he asked for a double portion before Elijah got taken up into the clouds with, chariots of fire and all that. He asked for a double portion from Elijah, and Elijah said, hey, if you see me get taken up, then you'll get the double portion. So he actually saw Elijah getting taken up, so he got the double portion, and he started to do miracles right away. As a matter of fact, right when he got the cloak, he went to the Jordan, the river, and then slapped the coat down, or the mantle, right down onto the water, and it separated just like it did for Elijah. But the miracle we're going to talk about right now is the miracle with the Shunammite's son. Okay, so this is Elisha, and he's been going around, doing God's work and all that stuff. And he actually ends up meeting this woman, this very wealthy woman. And so we'll start here in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 8. Here we go. One day, Elisha went to Shunem, and a well-to-do woman was there who urged him to stay for a meal. So whenever he came by, he stopped there to eat. She said to her husband, I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God. Let's make a small room on the roof and put in it a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp for him. Then he can stay there whenever he comes to us. One day, Elisha came. He went up to his room and lay down there. He said to his servant, Gehazi, call the Shunammite. So he called her, and she stood before him. Elisha said to him, tell her you have gone to all this trouble for us. Now what can be done for you? Can we speak on your behalf to the king or the commander of the army? She replied, I have a home among my own people. What can be done for her? Elisha asked. Gehazi said, well, she has no son, and her husband is old. Then Elisha said, call her. So he called her and stood in the doorway. About this time next year, Elisha said, you will hold a son in your arms. No, my lord, she objected. Don't mislead your servant, O man of God. But the woman became pregnant, and the next year, about the same time, she gave birth to a son, just as Elisha had told her. Okay, we'll stop there. Verse 17. So, like I said, Elisha, was traveling, and this well-to-do woman there, a Shunammite, asked him to, basically stay there. And then she asked her husband to build a room on the roof. Now, back then, roofs were flat. And actually, roofs were treated like patios or decks back in those days because they were flat. And, things were done on the roof, like work was done on the roof, or, gatherings and stuff like that. All that stuff was able to be done on the roof because it was flat. And so this woman, a portion of the roof was used to build a room for Elisha whenever he came by during his travels. So she did end up building it. And then he wanted to do something nice for her and said, hey, he asked his servant, hey, Gehazi, go ask her to come. And then when she came, he's like, hey, what do you want? And what's interesting is it says right there, it's kind of weird. She says, Elisha says, call the Shunammite in chapter 12, or verse 12. So he called her, and she stood before him. And Elisha said to him, tell her, you have gone to all this trouble for us. Now what can be done for you? Now, I don't know. It reads weird as if she's in front of Elisha and he's still telling Gehazi to talk to her. I don't know if that means, call the Shunammite, so he called her and she stood before him, meaning she stood before Gehazi, or Elisha. It sounds like they're all three are right there. And Elisha says to him, to Gehazi, to tell her to, what can they do for her. So it was kind of weird that, I don't know, that wording is a little weird. So I don't know exactly what that means, but maybe that's what he did. Maybe he did tell her. And then after that, though, she replies to him, I have a home among my people. Basically saying, no, I don't need anything. I'm good. You don't need to tell anybody anything from there because, the king or the commander of the army or anything, because I have everything I need right here around her. And so she doesn't need anything, she says. But then Elisha, pushes us a little bit more and asks Gehazi, what the heck does she need? And Gehazi tells her, hey, she doesn't have a son. And of course, back in biblical times, it was a shameful thing for a woman not to be able to bear children for her husband. And so it was a real blessing if you were to, get pregnant as a woman and have kids, and actually having a lot of kids was even more of a blessing. So back then it wasn't looked down upon well if you were not able to have kids. So when she says, she basically objected, don't mislead your servant, oh man of God. She was like, no way, don't bring my hopes up. Don't put my hopes up, because she's probably obviously wanted kids for a long time and she's older because her husband is old, quote unquote. So she can't be too much younger than him. And so having a son would be a blessing, but she's like, don't be messing with me here, Elisha. I need to know if this is true. And then she actually did end up having a child, and he grew up. And it says there in verse 18, the child grew, and one day he went out to his father, who was in the reapers. My head, he said to his father. His father told the servant, carry him to his mother. After the servant had lifted him up and carried him to his mother, the boy sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, then shut the door and went out. She called her husband and said, please send me one of the servants and a donkey so I can go to the man of God quickly and return. Why go to him today? He asked. It is not the new moon or the Sabbath. It's all right, she said. Okay. So we'll stop there real quick just to talk about Elisha's miracle that God followed through with. And isn't that cool? Like, to the point where you have such a relationship with God that you can ask someone what they want. They don't tell you what they want. You ask your servant, hey, what do you think she needs or wants? And then he says, well, she's old. She doesn't have a kid. Or her husband's old and they don't have a kid. And then Elisha can actually ask God for or give her this blessing of a child, this miracle, and it's within God's will. Because remember, we can ask for whatever our hearts desire, and God will give it to us, but it has to be within God's will. As long as we're asking within God's will, it'll happen. And so to have that connection with God, to be able to ask someone whatever they want, what can we do for you? And it has nothing to do with, he suggested, talking to the king or talking to the army commander. It had nothing to do with that. And she didn't even ask for anything. And then him and Gehazi comes up with, oh, what about a kid, a child? And so he obviously asks God to bless this family with a child, and then God grants it. So to be that close to God, to understand, to know that that's going to be in God's will, because he hears us, and that's within God's purview, not only his purview, but his will, that he could bless this family with a child, and God's going to do it. I mean, that is an awesome connection with God, to be able to do that. I only know one other person that, in my lifetime that has had something similar to that, and that's my grandfather. And maybe I'll talk about him more as the podcast goes later on, and we'll talk about him and the things God was able to do through him and the blessings that happened through my grandfather. I mean, amazing stuff. It's like this kind of stuff. It's just amazing. But anyways, so she's like, it would be a blessing to have a child, but she's already probably gotten used to the fact that she wasn't going to have a child. Now she's blessed with a child. Elisha is able to talk to God like that. Such a great connection. And then now a kid dying out in the field getting a big headache. I don't know if it's an aneurysm or whatever. Goes the servant. Well, first of all, the husband says, "Hey, servant, go take the kid to the mom." Then the kid ends up dying in mom's arms. And she basically just nonchalantly brings him up to the man of God's room, places him on his bed, lays him there and shuts the door. And then tells the husband, hey, I'm going to have a servant get me a donkey, and so we can go to the man of God quickly, and then we'll return. And then he's like, why do you want to go to him? So it seems like she didn't tell him the kid was dead. It's weird. It doesn't appear as if the kid is dead because of the reaction of the husband. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it seems like he doesn't know. First of all, he just tells the servant, hey, servant, go take the kid, carry the kid to his mother. So the servant does that. And it doesn't appear like he went to follow. right? I'm not sure, but it doesn't appear that way. And then also it says later on that she says, hey, give me a servant and a donkey so I can go to the man of God. And then the husband just asks a couple questions like, why do you want to go to him? It's not the new moon. It's not the Sabbath. Like, not actually realizing that the kid is dead. It appears that way, that he doesn't know. Because it'd be weird for him not to react like, oh yeah, man, shoot. The kid is, our child is dead. Let's go talk to the prophet. Let's go talk to Elisha, man. And so it just doesn't appear that way. So I don't think she told the husband that the child was dead. And then one other thing you notice is that she's a very persistent woman, and you're going to see that more as we go through here. And she just does not let anything stop her from doing things like getting the husband to build a house for the Elisha, the prophet. And then now we're going to see more. So she asked for the servant and the donkey, okay, so that she can go quickly. And then in verse 24, it says, she saddled the donkey and said to her servant, lead on, don't slow down unless I tell you to. She set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. Okay, so there you see, she's like, don't slow down. You're going to just go, just beat feet, and we're going to run for it. So nothing's stopping her to get to this, to get to Elisha. And it kind of gives you a little sense of her personality. I mean, she's a go-getter. She's a hard charger there. Okay, so now verse 25, she says, so she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When he saw her in the distance, the man of God said to his servant Gehazi, look, there's the Shunammite. Run to meet her and ask her, are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right? Everything is all right, she said. When she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came over to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. Let's talk about a couple things. Again, she is persistent, and she waits to talk to the man, like the guy, right? Like, she doesn't want to give all her information, or, she doesn't want to give that information to Gehazi when Gehazi comes out and says, are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your kid all right? Yeah, we're all right. We're good. But then when she gets to Elisha, when she gets to him, the guy that can make decisions, then she lets it out and she grabs a hold. She clings to her feet. She's basically like in distress and clinging on to him. He realized this, and again, here's another area where it tells you that he had such a good communication, good connection with God, because he says this, leave her alone. She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why. So what that kind of tells me is the fact that he has such a good connection with God that maybe God tells him everything, or almost everything, because he's surprised that God has not told him what's going on with this lady. And so it's kind of like, wow, you must have such a good connection that God tells you, people are coming up to you and he's telling you what they want. And you'll see in some other stories in 2 Kings, as you read through, like in the famine there in Samaria, you're going to see like God tells him things and tells him what's going to happen in the future. And so this is another, indication that he is such I wish I would have that kind of connection with God. It is so awesome. Okay, so then it says in verse 28, did I ask you for a son, my Lord? She said, didn't I tell you? Don't raise my hopes. Elisha said to Gehazi, tuck your cloak into your belt, take my staff into your hand and run. If you meet anyone, don't greet him. And if anyone greets you, do not answer. Lay my staff on the boy's face. But the child's mother said, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you. So he got up and followed her. Okay, so we'll stop there real quick just to talk about a couple things. Again, she, in verse 28 there, she's telling him, hey, I told you, don't raise my hopes. That's what I was talking about earlier when she told the man of God, no, my Lord, she objected, don't mislead your servant about the miracle of the boy being born. And now she says, hey, I told you not to mislead me. Like, why would you do this to me? And then Elisha tells Gehazi, tuck your cloak into your belt, take my staff in your hand and run. And the reason why, obviously, he's telling him to tuck his cloak into his belt so that it doesn't get in your way and it doesn't slow you down. You need to move fast. Go. And he says, don't greet anybody if anybody greets you on the road. And again, those roads, obviously everybody traveled on those roads. And so you always greeted, it was normal custom to greet people on the roads. And so he's telling him, hey, if you greet, I don't want you to greet anyone on the road. And if anyone tries to greet you, don't answer. Just head to the boy, right? And then lay my staff on his face. All right. And then in verse 31, it goes on here. Gehazi went on ahead and laid the staff on the boy's face, but there was no sound or response. So Gehazi went back to meet Elisha and told him, "The boy has not awakened." When Elisha reached the house, there was the boy lying dead on his couch. He went in, shut the door on the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. Then he got on the bed and lay on the boy, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. As he stretched himself out upon him, the boy's body grew warm. Elisha turned away and walked back and forth in the room and got on the bed and stretched out upon him once more. The boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha summoned Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite." And he did. When she came, he said, "Take your son." She came in, fell at his feet, and bowed to the ground. Then she took her son and went out. Okay, so, that's the end of that miracle there. So we're going to stop right there. But what we're going to talk about, we're going to finish up that little section there and talk about a couple things. First off, God's using Elisha to do miracles. Elijah was a little bit rougher around the edges, and he spoke out a lot. He was kind of reminded me of John the Baptist, right? Very strong-willed and, in your face, confrontive kind of guy. And Elisha is not like that necessarily. You see him do a couple things a couple times, you're like, whoa, yeah, he can be mean if he wants to. Or not necessarily mean, but more aggressive. But for the most part, he's more reserved than Elijah. And Elijah did these miracles that were, like he basically took people out, with miracles, that God provided. He did these huge things like calling fire down from heaven with the priests of Baal, like we talked about in the other episode. But Elisha, he did a lot of healing actually in his ministry. He did a lot of miracles that revolved around healing and restoration and stuff, and so it was very helpful to people in terms of helping them and their lives, and things in their lives like, food, bringing food and oil and anyways, and that's another story of the widow's oil. So in this case, he's raising this child from the dead. And a couple things here. It says in verse 34, it says at the end there, it says, the boy's body grew warm. So that the body has been laying there for a while. So the kid's been dead for a little while because it was cold and the body actually grew warm. And so a couple of things here. Now we talked about numbers, right? We talked about the pattern of 2 in a past episode. We also talked about the number 7, Noah and the number 7. Well, the pattern of 2 was used here and the number 7 was used here in these miracles again, as we talked about miracles that it relates to before in the other episode. Well, here we go again. Then he got on the bed and lay upon the body, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. As he stretched himself out on the body, upon him, the boy's body grew warm. Then it said, Elisha turned away, walked back and forth in the room, and then got on the bed and stretched out upon him once more. So that's twice. Again, pattern of 2. 1 plus 1. The same thing twice. So 1 plus 1. So there's 2 again there. And then the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. So before the miracle actually came to fruition, full fruition, where the boy actually got up and opened his eyes, he sneezed 7 times. And there goes the number 7 again, which again is completion, right? A completion of a miracle. And we'll talk about the number 7 again, as we did when we talked about in the Noah and the number 7. We talked about the specific miracle that Elisha did. Well, we're going to get into it this next episode, but right now it shows you that the number 7 is related to the completion of miracles. And you're going to see this number 7 again in the next episode when we talk about Elisha's next miracle. Okay? So it's really cool stuff here, man. Talking about just this one miracle, you see a few things in here. You see the connection between Elisha and God, that super connection. I wish we were as determined to know God like that and to be in connection with God like that, and we talk about the Shunammite and how determined she was to be with and be in contact with Elisha, the prophet, to be in the presence of a holy man of God. Okay, I wish we were determined to know God like that. I wish we were determined to know God like the Shunammite woman was to Elisha. The connection to God was through Elisha, and she wanted to be connected to God, and through Elisha was how she was going to do it. I wish we could do that too, how to be that determined. That, is awesome. And then there's a few things that the woman here, there's a few things about her personality, about her characteristics, that we see that is real cool. So there's 5 different things that we'll talk about right now. I'm just going to go through them very quickly here. But the wealthy woman she was very persistent. She persevered in reliance. We want to persevere in prayer and in reliance. And so that's how we want to do it, in prayer and reliance. It doesn't say this Shunammite here was in prayer, but I'm talking about us for reliance and prayer. But in terms of her, she was hospitable. That's number 1, right? She donates that room. She wants the man of God around her family, that kind of thing. So she's hospitable to people of God. God. So one, we've got to do that as well. Number two, accepting the miracle of the child. Like at first she's like, hey, don't lead me here. Don't mislead me here. But she accepts the miracle of God. But then when crisis comes, she goes directly to Elisha. Remember, she bypassed Gehazi when Gehazi asked her what was wrong. She went directly to Elisha, and then she started talking and saying what was wrong. She didn't even tell her husband, it looks like. It looks like she went directly to the man of God and then went full-on crisis mode to him, because she knew he had a connection with God. Number four, she clung to him and she wouldn't let go, right? That's how close we need to get with God. We have to act like that too when it comes to God and knowing God and being with God. We have to cling to God just like that. And number five, no one was going to stop her from getting to the man of God. Like, no one was going to stop her. She told the servant, hey, don't stop this donkey. We are going to rock and roll and get to the prophet here, to the man of God, and nothing's going to stop us. So we learn a lot of good things, not only from Elisha, we also learn some things from the Shunammite woman. And so I want, to pass this on to say, as Christians, let's try to be like the Shunammite woman, and then let's also try to be like Elisha. Let's connect the two here, and let's be as close as God as we can, and to the point where we communicate with him, and we understand him when we hear him, and he speaks to us directly, and we can understand him, and there's no confusion, and be surprised when he doesn't tell us the future, when he doesn't tell us miracles, things like, hey, this is what this woman is going to come see you for. That is amazing stuff. And so anyways, I just wanted to talk about that miracle. This is part one of Elisha and the miracles. We'll be doing part two here on the next episode, but I thank you for joining me. And until next time, stay safe, stay motivated, and keep seeking liberty. Joining us for another episode of the Liberty Podcast with Clint Armitage. If you want to get in touch, email us at info@clintarmitage.com.